All right, so everyone could hear that. And then we'll just wait right now until we have a good kind of steady number of attendees before we get started. But I guess I can start speaking to all the attendees. Welcome as you guys are joining us. As I was just explaining, we're just gonna wait for everyone to kind of pile in here. And then we will get started with the 4th annual Q&A with our wonderful experts and our wonderful host, Adil, who's going to be moderating and taking care of everything for the next 2 hours or hour
Absolutely
and a half.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah, not everything, but and then my name is Nate. I am going to be taking care of the technical aspects of it, as well as helping people out in terms of questions that they want to ask during the presentation, and anything that people have questions with. They can always message me personally if you have technical issues with signing in and everything. 4th quarterly, not annual. Okay. Yes, not annual. 4th quarterly. Yes. So I'm just going to start giving just a couple of housekeeping things in terms of our attendees. When we are doing this, we are live recording it, and it's going to be posted on the Misophonia website as well as on YouTube. So if you don't have, or if you have personal questions that maybe you want to ask later, we'll try to figure out a way that you can get connected with somebody that you want to ask questions with, and maybe you can schedule an appointment or something like that. But this is going to be a live Q&A, and it is going to be posted publicly. So just to let everybody know, for our panelists, they are going to do their best to try to eat, and if they're probably not going to eat, but if they need to take a sip of water, that they're going to do it off screen to make everyone comfortable. We do have closed captioning on right now, so if you do have issues with sounds of people talking, you should be able to see the text underneath of all of the panelists, and we're going to be going on speaker view, so you'll be able to see them talking as well while they're doing it, so you know who's talking. As far as that is, I think that's basically everything. And so I'm going to turn it over to Adil, our wonderful host for this Q&A, and let it go from there.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, no, that was. Thanks for all the housekeeping stuff. Thanks for everyone coming. I see people are still trickling in, and while people are trickling in, I want to especially thank the participants. We have Jenna Northern, Cindy Simon, who may be here, but she's having a gigantic storm in her area, and so she's been losing power every once in a while this afternoon. So hopefully we'll have her, and we have Jolene Jaffe, who I'm sure a lot of folks know, and we'll have them. Everyone will introduce themselves shortly, but kind of wanted to say thank you, everybody. And hiding behind a beautiful back screen there is Dr. Marsha Johnson as well, who's making a quiche and may have to step in to be the audiologist of the afternoon if Cindy's not available. But yeah, so yeah, actually, great question. Actually, maybe this might be a good question for Nate. The Q&A and the chat, maybe the difference between those two and how people can use those during the afternoon.
Yeah, I can talk about that really quick. So there are 2 different options when we're doing the panel discussion. There's Q&A, which is, if you scroll over your screen, you should see underneath, there should be one that says chat. So you're able to chat with everyone in here. And then there's also one other option, which is Q&A. In the Q&A, you can ask questions, and then one of the panelists, if they're wanting to answer it live, they can do that, or they can also type it in there. So those are kind of the 2 differences between the chat, which you kind of give to everybody, and then the Q&A, which is you ask your question, and then one of the people will answer that question. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, and we encourage people to. We had some questions up front, but we want this to be as real time interactive as possible. Just to give everyone if it might be helpful, kind of the rough. We're going to keep it pretty organic, but some of the topics that we're going to cover, and this might help you as you're thinking about when to and what questions to ask are, obviously things like what are the common therapies. We're going to be talking about occupational therapies because we have an expert here, Jenna, on that. We're going to be talking about maybe new therapies, devices. We're going to be talking about the perennial issue of official recognition of misophonia, how to get accommodations in workplace, schools, related conditions. Okay, we might go over time here, but we're going to be talking about family issues and things like what might be the cause of misophonia and other non-standard symptoms if we get time for things like that. So just to give you folks a heads up about some of the topics we'll be covering today or trying to cover today. So yeah, I guess maybe yes, people are still coming in and we can start with some introductions. I can just quickly introduce myself. Adil Ahmad. I've been to the convention since I guess 2018 now. I've done a couple in-person ones. I'm not officially part of Misophonia Association, but I love everything they do, and I try to participate in everything. I host the Misophonia podcast, which started right after the 2019 convention, because I was having so many amazing conversations with a lot of the folks that I met there, and it's now season 5 is about to end, and we're right at about 100,000 downloads. So 100,000 downloads of the podcast in just 2.5 years. So it's been about 150 episodes or so. These are 150 interviews, mostly with 99% of them are with sufferers, just like most of the people listening. And we're just talking about just real talk about misophonia for about an hour. So have a listen. I'm sure at this point there'll be many episodes that anyone here will relate to. There's some a wide variety of things. I've learned a lot, and yeah, it's a little bit about me, but I want to hand it over to our panelists to maybe introduce themselves a little bit. Jenna, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Hello, everyone from Richmond, Virginia. I'm Jenna Northern, and I am an occupational therapist that I've been practicing since 1993, and I see children and adults. And I also have specialty certification in sensory integration and praxis training or praxis test, and I am board certified in neurofeedback. I do not have misophonia, but I do have other what I would consider more typical sensory processing hypersensitivities. And so I have a little bit of sort of what I would consider walk the walk. I understand some of what people with misophonia are going through, but there's also very much a difference in terms of how people respond to treatment. I first became aware of misophonia about 10 years ago when I had a colleague who has very similar training refer a client to me, and she said, I think we need to try neurofeedback because I haven't been able to make any breakthrough. And that started my journey. And I can't really explain why, but I have spent more time and effort learning about this particular diagnosis than any other. I'm passionate about it. I think part of that is because it is so pervasive in how it affects people's lives, and in particular their family relationships, and people don't understand it. So it is not acknowledged. It is not supported by a lot of people. So that's kind of how I got into it. I am co-owner and a practicing clinician of Spot On Therapy Group here in Richmond. So it's a primarily outpatient clinic. And so I also have administrative duties, but of my caseload, 20% has misophonia. And we are now seeing an increase in the referrals for misophonia, probably, I would say, anywhere from 2 to 4 every month. So the word's getting out that this is a thing. It is real and there's hope for it. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of what I know and what I do.
Yeah, thanks for that background. That's
Sure.
yeah, super interesting. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing what you've learned and how you help folks, and hopefully people can learn something. Jolene, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Jolene Jaffe. My office that I haven't been in for over 2 years is located in Sherman Oaks, California. I'm working completely online now. I've been working with misophonia for about 10 years, I think. I started out with, I do not have misophonia, similar to Jenna. I have my own, I have 2 other neurological disorders, if you want to call them that. One of them is tinnitus or tinnitus. And it was kind of because of that I ended up getting into this. And I've seen, well, currently my practice is about maybe 90% of the people I see have misophonia. And that's a lot of people that I'm seeing. It's been hundreds and hundreds of people with misophonia, most with adolescents, but some children, some adults. And I have over the 10 years evolved an approach, a protocol that combines a lot of things that I know from my 40 plus years as a therapist, family therapist. I include a lot of different modalities and approaches, and I've come up with my own way that things seem to work and seems to be helpful to many, many people. My way of measuring success is not by numbers on a quiz exactly, but it's more like outcome based. So, excuse me one moment.
I think Jolene's de-triggering herself. Thank you, Jolene.
Yeah, I just hit a throat thing. So anyway, I have seen the way that I measure success would be more like, how do people's lives improve? And what I've seen is that the kids that I work with have gotten through high school, they've gotten through college, they've been in dorms where they didn't think they would be able to survive. They have gotten degrees and graduate degrees, and they've gotten into relationships, and the adults that I'm working with have improved their ability to work in a work setting, and to be to be living with someone, to be in a marriage, to be a parent. So it's kind of more the visual outcome in terms of the way that people are able to manage. So I have right here, I keep right here beside me in my desk, I keep my magic wand. It's the thing that I wish I could just wave and make this problem disappear for everybody, but it doesn't work that way. So instead, there are all these other things that I have found are useful. And so that's what I do. And the people, there aren't enough there. I get referrals from all over the place. People find me online, but a lot of audiologists refer to me as well. And from all over the country. And I'm trying to train some other therapists, because there are not enough therapists who understand or even have ever heard of misophonia. So that's my kind of mission, because I have too many people on a waiting list, and I have not that many more years of energy that I'm going to be able to keep up at the pace that the pandemic has thrown at me. So that's my introduction.
Yeah, that's something that I know a few therapists, but they all way too much, more than they can handle. They're talking about, how do I train other people? So if anyone's looking for a career trajectory here, this is a hot one. So I guess Cindy is going to be a third panelist, but she seems to be maybe, I think her electrical system is incapacitated at the moment. So she's an audiologist. However, Dr. Marsha Johnson also is one, and she was gracious enough to maybe fill in if needed. And so, would you like to, for the few folks who may not have heard of you, want to give a little intro?
Yeah, well, thank you, Adil. Thank you. And it's good to hear these other two people speak. We certainly have a
Yeah,
wealth
it's an all-star
of
panel.
experience here, don't we? We have, if you figure that I have over 25 years with misophonia, we have a lot of experience with this condition. And that's what we really need. We need a lot of eyes on misophonia with different backgrounds so that we can sort of crack the nut that this condition poses to the medical world. Still mysterious and difficult to categorize. So I'm Marsha Johnson. I'm a doctor of audiology. I earned my doctoral degree in my field, and I just opened a clinic for tinnitus way back in '97. I didn't even work for anybody else. I just opened a clinic like I would. That's my kind of personality. So in came people with strange symptoms in the summer of '97, and there was 3 of them in a row, and they told me they had a hyperacusis, and I discovered that they did not have hyperacusis. So then the chase was on to see what this was. And over time, an audiologist works with sound therapy. We work with appliances for hearing loss, children that have auditory processing, people that have vestibular disorders. Our field is pretty specific. And so if you meet one audiologist, you'll see quite a few of us have exactly the same kind of backgrounds. And misophonia was something new, and I recognized that, and I started collecting cases. And at one point, I had 5,000 people on a Yahoo support group. And this was still early, and this was when people were saying, these individuals, Marsha, they have psychiatric disorders. You're not recognizing this. And I'm like, well, they don't seem to. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist, but, I'm not just fresh off the turnip truck either. And they have very similar histories. And, so I just kept on making noise really about misophonia. And here we are today. So audiologists, our field, again, we're using sound as therapy. And with those first 3 teenagers, one of them told me that when she went to school, the only thing she could go to was band and to sit in the cafeteria at lunch and see her friends. And I was thinking, she had just told me her whole history of how she didn't like eating sounds and breathing sounds and so forth. Sorry to mention triggers. But so I was like, well, how can I put cafeteria noise in your head? So audiologists had access to sound therapy devices. So I started with that. So we only had 1 or 2 sound therapy devices. Everybody pretty much got the same thing. And she was able to go back to school and finish her high school degree in college and so forth. So that's kind of what I gathered together, a dozen audiologists in the early 2000s. The condition got renamed from selective sound sensitivity syndrome, which is what I gave it, to misophonia, which I always say this at everything. I don't like the name. It means hatred of sound. It doesn't fit. My patients and our patients and you all in the audience, you don't hate all sounds. It's just some sounds. And there's also visual components and tactile components. And moreover, as we go along, we're really discovering that there's also what I call ideation components. So we have to look at auditory memory and the persistence of the trigger sounds in people's heads that can resonate in there sometimes for hours. I've been starting a new thing I call trigger, what do I call it? Trigger memory interruption. I'm coming up with a name like that. I haven't really put a solid thing on it, but what I've been doing with a few patients in the last few months is I'm getting them, those ones that this is a problem for, I'm having them rush off to get a headset and blast their favorite music loudly into their head for 30 minutes and see if we can unseat this echoing auditory signal. So I'm still basically experimenting on my patients, honestly, because you got to do with what you have. That's my philosophy, and see. So if you do go to see an audiologist, what they're going to do is give you a hearing evaluation, no doubt, and everything's probably just fine. And then they're going to hopefully talk to you about things and find out if you fit in the category. And then from the audiologist, you can get what we call low gain Bluetoothing hearing aids. And those low gain means we turn the hearing aid part off because, you don't want to hear things better.
Right. Well, I think we'll
Okay,
talk about the
I'll
devices.
stop there. I'll stop
Yeah,
there.
no,
but
that's fine.
I do
You
want
covered
to introduce what we do.
Yeah. No, you covered a few things that the new, it's interesting, the new therapy you're talking about. Maybe we'll cover that in a little bit. And yeah, devices we definitely want to get into because there's always questions about that. But Marcia is also de-triggering herself there. Very good. So yeah, so why don't we get into it? The first question's pretty quick, and it's always asked, is there a cure? And most folks know, but some folks might not know, there isn't a cure yet. There's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of research in different fields happening, but as of yet, if you came here just to find out if there's a cure or not, there is no cure yet. But we're hoping that a lot of some of the things you learn in the next couple hours will help you at least cope and manage, or know where to go for resources to learn more. Before we get into kind of talking about common therapies, would Jillian or Jenna or Masha want to briefly elaborate on the fact that there's no cure yet, but at least give some people some hope that things are going in the right direction, maybe.
I could speak just a couple minutes about that. Please remember that it was barely any time at all ago that we knew nothing. When I started looking in the literature, there was one referral in a magazine in 1997, and it called it hysterical hyperacusis.
I actually had not heard of that term. That's interesting. Okay.
Well, because again, it was regarded really honestly, if you complained to your doctor, they thought you were, a drama queen, or, little kids can't communicate as well. So I just cannot believe how far we have come. It's unbelievable, the amount of information and data. We're going to have 3 of the newest researchers presenting at the convention in October, and that's part of the $4 million Ream Foundation money that was distributed 2 or 3 years ago. So I just want everybody to feel very, very hopeful. We are unlocking these secrets, and we're going to figure this out. It's going to happen.
There's no cure yet, but thank you for mentioning the Ream Foundation. There is finally, and this is new as of the last few years, there's actually a lot of, there's millions of dollars being unlocked for research, and that's something that wasn't happening more than a few years ago. So so there's hope there. So a question that has come up and that always comes up is current common therapies. Maybe let's start with so Jenna, by the way, we will get into kind of occupational therapy stuff in a little bit. Well, yeah, maybe we should start with Jillian, because I think Jenna will have the floor quite a bit. But yeah, Jillian, do you want to talk to folks about kind of some of the common therapies that are out there for misophonia, for folks that might not know?
Well, in addition to the audiology provided sound approach, which I think is incredibly helpful, I think it also is helpful for people to combine that with some counseling, the therapist who understands what misophonia is, mainly to provide ways to manage the anxiety and upsetness and the real disruption and dysregulation that's caused by something that is so incredibly frustrating and irritating. So there are a lot of different approaches to calm down your neurological system when you have a reaction to things. There are ways to begin to have less reaction, to be training yourself to defocus on that thing, whatever that thing is. Like Marcia was saying, you get a sound in your head and it's like you can't get it out of your head. I think people sometimes call it an earworm or something. It's a sound that just won't let you go. And so there are some management kind of ways around that. There are a variety of experimental or newer technologies, newer approaches. People have tried things with EMDR, with tapping, with neurofeedback, with some people have tried hypnosis. The one thing you don't want to try, please don't try, is when some brilliant, wise, oh so helpful person says, oh, let's just expose you to that sound that you hate and we'll see if you can get used to it. Bad idea. Don't do that. You're allergic to peanuts, so let's just feed you a lot of peanuts so you'll get used to it. Doesn't work that way. So if someone suggests exposure therapy, or if you've had the misfortune of being in a situation where you had that process, there are some ways to kind of get back to a better state of mind. One of the other things that I find particularly useful is to involve families, because most of the people that show up now are kids and young adults, adolescents, and their families are involved. This is not an individual person's problem. It's a family problem. Everybody is affected by this, and everybody, whether they intend to or not, is probably contributing to it by things that they do or say or don't do, or whatever it is, that there are ways that people are inadvertently making it worse. And so it's helpful to have a family conversation. I often do appointments with parents separately, and then with other family members brought in, brother, sister, that kind of thing.
So is that like setting boundaries and kind of just kind of having, because I find when people are talking about it with each other, even if the triggers still happen, there's like a lower, your brain doesn't assign a threat if at least there's some acknowledgement.
Yeah, because one of the worst things is what happened to people before was when older adults are in this situation where nobody understood this, but like Marcia's saying, so you were hysterical, or you were crazy, or you were, you know, just a high maintenance person, or whatever the kind of label got thrown at you. And that's the way that a lot of people grew up. And it's very, very distressing to have those kind of labels stuck on you.
Yeah, it spirals. Yeah.
It's awful. And so the more we understand about it, I mean, I think that younger generation now, the good news is we have a name for it, not a good name, but we have a name, and it's a real thing. Yes, it is. And what do we do about it? There are things that can be done. You're not crazy. No, it isn't just that you're a obnoxious, you know, disrespectful brat. You know, this is something neurological that's going on. Family.
And
Can I jump in for a second?
yes, of course.
One recommendation that I have for all the participants is that the Misophonia Association has a wealth, and I mean unbelievable amount of information and recorded webinars from previous conventions at a very reasonable price. And as a clinician, I've learned so much from reviewing those, and that has influenced now what I do as a clinician. So for any of the families or other clinicians listening, I highly recommend that you pick even last year's convention and purchase those videos, start reviewing them prior to the October convention, because I think personally it is going to give you so much hope. There is so much more out there that had I been working on my own and not reached out, not pursued that information, I wouldn't have as much to be offering my clients now. So I strongly encourage people to look at the information that's available to them. It's going to be hopefully very, you're going to feel very optimistic.
Yeah, please, Marcia.
So I love this question, and I'd like to take a little time to cover a little bit, because I do this every week in my clinic with my misophonia patients and their families. So when you ask us what kind of treatments are available, what kinds of management therapies are available, that is a very important question, and it's one of the hardest things to actually grasp, because the information is not necessarily easily available. There are so many types of treatments that have been tried. I kind of hesitate myself. I try not to use the word treatment. Treatment to me implies like something that you know is you're going to do and it'll probably help. But I feel that our problem here with misophonia is we're still in a very experimental stage. So there are two large categories of treatments. One is purely physiologic, which is kind of where your audiologists and maybe even your behavioral scientists and your reflexologists and your Rolfers and your acupuncture and your chiropractors and your functional neurologists and all of these people, they kind of fall there. I'll probably forget someone. I'm sorry, you know. And then you have the other side of the mountain, which is the sort of more psychological, the psychotherapists, the psychologists, the counselors, the body works, the inspirational people who live by waterfalls in the mountains. I mean, I'm just talking, there is a gamut. There have been many different approaches to this. And then in between those two kinds of approaches, sometimes there's combined, which is what I prefer. I think you should have a team. You should have somebody from the auditory rehabilitation side mixed in with a good counselor that understands misophonia and anxiety and the devastation that it causes when your own body responds almost before you can think about the fact you're responding. That's part of misophonia is very interesting to me. And so I don't know how else to say this. I'll try to say it nicely, but basically you're all still guinea pigs. You kind of are.
What I'm hearing is, yeah, there's a wide gamut. There's everything from like, you know, putting on your earbuds, and there's you know, audiologist devices. There's CBT. There's talk therapy. There is you know, the waterfall guy you're talking about. But
hypnotherapy. Don't forget the hypnotherapy.
Right.
Chris Pearson. Yes. So
yeah,
you're going to
hypnotherapy,
experiment,
yeah.
right? You're going to make an experiment of yourself, right, Adil?
Yes, I'm happy to. Anyone who wants to do research, and yeah, there's a lot of groups doing research. By the way, who are looking for folks to you know, to be included in research projects. So yeah, across a lot of different you know, approaches. So hopefully we'll converge into something. But right now it's pretty much a team, like you said. Yeah, Jolene, please.
I'm going to hop in on one thing that Marcia just said. When I'm working with people, I actually end up making a distinction between a response and a reaction. I think what happens is a reaction. It's like a reflex. It's like you hear a sound and you have this instant reaction. I know historically there's this stimulus response kind of approach to therapy. So that word is used that way, but I don't use it that way. I use reaction as the thing that happens automatically in your neurological system. Response to me is the thing where you actually have an option, where you can calm yourself down enough to make a decision or a choice, or have a different way that you can go. So I think those two things are similar, but not the same. So just language wise.
Yeah, no,
I can't agree with you more. So let's think about it this way. There are some treatments that want to arrest the initial trigger response of your brain cells, of your neural system. That would be ideal if you could just interrupt whatever's happening at the start, I think. And then there's this other end, which is, okay, now you've experienced this negative feeling and emotion and response or reaction, and now we have therapies that are going to change your process of doing that. You can affect how you react, is how I put it. But Jolene, I'm sure you know more about that. But I'm just saying that that's like a 10,000 mile road away from one another right now, anyway.
Yeah, you're talking about right. The two things being arresting the initial reaction, and then there is once you hit that high stress state, how do you return back to equilibrium as fast as possible is also key, and might be more realistic to get to first before we start messing around with the brain. Okay, so yeah, why don't we come back to some of those in a little bit? That's a good discussion, but I do want to get into something I don't know too much about as occupational therapy, and maybe Jenna can give us a little introduction as to what it is and how it could be helpful.
Sure. Well, a lot of people think when they hear occupational therapy, they think that I'm going to help them find a job. That sometimes we do contribute to that, but that is it wasn't the best name, just similar to misophonia. I wish that it had been something different, but it's not. If you think about what occupies your time, so as an adult, I'm a parent. I work as an occupational therapist. I have to manage my home. I have to be able to pay my bills. What are all of the things that literally I need to do between getting out of bed in the morning and getting in bed at night? Can I do them? And if not, what's in my way? Is it a physical barrier? Is it a cognitive barrier? Is it a social emotional barrier for a child? That might be, can they attend school? Can they effectively attend? Can they write? Can they play on the playground and climb on the playground equipment? And so if you think it's obviously individual for every person, depending on what they need to do. For occupational therapists, you can find an occupational therapist, and we call it OT for short. And you might find an OT in the neonatal intensive care unit, literally at the beginning of life, and then all the way to end of life, and all the stages in between. And we're present in physical disability settings, but also in psychosocial settings, mental health facilities. So the field itself is amazing. There's a lot. I'm always learning. So I have to say I'm very proud to be an OT, and it's something that I love. So I don't mind getting up and going to work every day. In relation to to misophonia, a lot of times the people with misophonia that come in, that may not be the only thing that they're dealing with. They may have other diagnoses as well. And so I'm sure, just like any other professional, you've got to take all the factors into consideration, and looking at their culture, looking at the dynamics, the family dynamics, and just trying to pull all the parts and pieces together and figure out the best way to help that person achieve their goals. What is their goal? I know I've heard in some of the other clinics, one family's goal might be that they want to eat a meal together. For other families, that's not important. They want to be able to successfully drive in a car on a car trip together. But because of the misophonia, that's creating a problem. And so as the OT, I'm going to, first of all, I wanted to make sure that I shared this point. I think it's critical to acknowledge what the person is experiencing, validate, and provide them with education on misophonia, so that I hear so many people say, I thought I was the only one, and trying to help them understand that there's so many other people that are dealing with this, and giving them the resources so that they can start to educate themselves. And a little bit of an aside, one of my favorite things about working with misophonia is that typically when they come in, there's a very depressed, shut down body language. There's not a lot of eye contact. Sometimes you see people holding their bodies in. There's not a lot of smiling and a lot of laughter. And I love to see the transformation when people start to gain, even if they just gain the knowledge that misophonia is something that's real. And I know I'm jumping a little bit. You had wanted just general about OT in general, but it truly is one of my favorite things to see that transformation. and to see them excited about coming in and smiling and engaged and telling me their successes over the last week. So that's a little bit of OT in a nutshell.
No, thank you for that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that actually, yeah, that definitely added to my knowledge. I don't think I've talked to any OT on the podcast. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to various parts of that. I want to break for, there's a couple questions that have come up, so I want to talk about those. But I do want to emphasize one thing you said was, validation. It's kind of sad, but validation is often like the one step that we don't even have that. Like there was and we're at such a state in Misophonia where, I mean, there was a mayor early in this year who publicly, lambasted that high schooler that is suing her school for accommodation. So we have public officials that are making fun of kids who have misophonia. So that's the level we're at. So the validation is a big thing. So if you can just validate somebody with misophonia, you've probably made their day, made their week. So thank you for talking about validation. I do want to, there's a couple questions that have come up, and I know I think Jillian's going to maybe jump into it for at least one of them. One of the questions from Lynn was actually just about she's in a building where there is some mechanical equipment that's making some obviously triggering sounds. Nothing can be done about it. She's wondering about strategies or noise canceling options. I personally get asked about noise canceling stuff. I have the Sony headphones, which are really nice. They're noise canceling, but they're kind of expensive. I also have the AirPods, which are more discreet, but in like a weird cafe where a lot of people are talking, I sometimes have to grab for these because they're over the ear. For a cheaper option, I have found there's a 3M sound there's something by 3M that's a Bluetooth headphone, which is not noise canceling, but it plays music, and it's like meant for construction sites. And it's only $40. So I sometimes encourage people to maybe take a look at that because it's like a fraction of the cost. I just wanted to quickly throw in those noise canceling options, but if anyone would want to take that question, or there is maybe you want to get to, yes, Jillian, you were going to answer something in the chat, so maybe if you can take that.
I want to respond to that, and probably Marcia does too. So there are a lot of things that sound wise can be done. Marcia can address environmentally. I want to address a different part of that. How do you live in a place where there's something you can't get away from? There's certain sounds that are just there. And I often tell a story, true story. I'll give you the shortest version of it. It has to do with a house that I lived in where, because of the location, it turned out there was a lot of honking going on. And it was very disturbing to me. And when I asked one of the neighbors said, well, you get used to it. And I said, yeah, I don't want to get used to it. I want them to stop doing that. And the guy said, well, good luck with that. And so I found that I had to figure out how to coexist with it, how to live with it, because it was nothing I could do to change it. So one of the activities that I suggest people do is make a list of the things in your life that you can or cannot change. And once you have that written down and you're looking at it, go to the list of things you cannot change. You really, if you're sure you cannot change them, and put as little energy as you can into that list, because you're just beating your head on the wall, frustrating yourself. Go to the list of things you can actually do something about, change, sound in your environment, various sorts of ways to calm down your neurological system, whatever sorts of things there are that you can learn how to do. Put your energy there. Otherwise, you get stuck being angry and upset about something that you actually can't fix. So that's the emotional side of it. Marcia has the sound environment side of it, I'm sure.
Well, again, it's kind of a smorgasbord, and you need to have a set of tools. And every person that has misophonia needs a toolbox with things. You might need sound generating equipment, or super wonderful noise canceling headphones, or AirPods, or earbuds. You might need very, very dark sunglasses, like mountaineering glasses with little blinder sides, so that when you're around visual triggers, that can cut down about 30% of your irritation. You might need things like fidget spinners for small children, or distracting little video games on those little things like phones, where research has shown us that children who engage in these little video worlds, their trigger response reduces dramatically, and they can have a little break. Whatever it works for you. I also recommend the Marsha Johnson corn nut therapy, which is every backpack has a bag of corn nuts. And if you are in an environment where people are eating and you're absolutely trapped, you take out this sack and eat corn nuts, because when you do, your head sounds like you're breaking up cement in your mouth, and it resonates. And trust me, it'll drive out any little sounds that bother you, and maybe you'll end up bothering other people. But
Yeah, I was gonna
you know,
say,
you
know your audience, maybe if you wherever you do it.
it's just possibilities. And if you can get some relief, and of course, here's the thing: when you put on headphones and things, as an audiologist, I want you to remember you can only cut out at max about 30 decibels of sound. I don't care what the packaging says. The truth is, you can really only cut out about 30 decibels of sound. And hang on a second, Paul, you can't do that right now. That's my husband. He's trying to clean up the house. If you rub your fingers like this by your ear, that's exactly 30 decibels of sound. So what's better is to use those headphones to cancel the sound, but then you must also flood your auditory system. So that's why you need Bluetoothing headphones, so you can use your phone or your iPad to put, drum beats from the Congo. I don't care what you listen to. Fill up those
That's good
auditory
music from the Congo.
fibers. Yeah, whatever. Listen to what you like, what makes you feel happy. And then all your 70,000 auditory cells say, I have something to do. So
Yeah, no,
this
that's a
is
good
kind
point.
of, very practical stuff I tell people.
Yeah. Yeah, I put music on top of whatever noise canceling, but I've heard people have some success, or at least some help with earplugs as well. I personally feel like I need it to be drowned completely, but
Oh yeah,
that's
no,
just me.
earplugs are good. We're doing a toolkit. Remember a deal.
Yes,
And
right.
also,
Right.
here's
Corn
another
nuts
tip.
and earplugs. Yeah.
Set up some respite care for yourself. So if you're going on vacation this summer and you're with your family, get your own hotel room, or stay somewhere different and go over there and visit, and give yourself some time to go lie down in quiet and let yourself refresh and recover. It's very important.
That's a good point, is to I always try to tell people to just, even if you don't use it, to schedule some time for yourself, or just tell yourself that whatever trigger environment you're in is temporary. And sometimes that, at least for me, kind of calms my mind down. Sometimes that involves obviously communicating with the rest of the people around you on vacation, but if you just schedule some time for yourself, self-care is very important, all part of the toolkit. Yeah, Julian, I know there's a couple other questions, but feel free to jump in on one of those.
Okay, so I have lots of clients that I see who are using various kinds of devices or earplugs or whatever. The newest one that someone told me about the other day, I was not familiar with it. It's called Loop. And there are two different versions of it, apparently, of more enhanced, I think, more enhanced and more basic. But anyway, she wants me to write an authorization assistance letter for her to take her, college exams using those, because they don't put any sound in.
Mm-hmm.
They're not electronic, but apparently they're very, very effective, according to her, and according to the online link she sent me to. So thank goodness, there are more varieties than the plain old fashioned like foam thing you stick in your ear and you say, that isn't helping. So
yeah.
keep looking.
Yeah, I don't want to advertise, but I have heard good things about Loop. I see Instagram ads, so they're obviously paying money for advertising. But I've also heard that they for people who wear earrings, they actually apparently look fashionable. So it's not just.
They do. They look like they're fashionable, and they're not very expensive, comparatively speaking.
Yeah.
There's a different question that I want to go back to.
Yeah, so there was there was a question by, I believe, Diane.
Yes.
I think that's the one. So she, and I'll just sum it up real quickly. So she she says she feels like a guinea pig because she has some rare other rare conditions that are not related to misophonia. But she's just wondering, do you find often with patients struggling with misophonia that they have other medical maladies that are just as much of work in progress as misophonia is? I personally hear about comorbid conditions all the time. Jolene, would you, and anybody else, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think, yes, there are a lot of, we don't know if they're separate or related conditions. You're saying it's separate, Diane, but we don't really know that. Maybe they're connected somehow. No idea. It's neurological. So anything that's neurological, anything else may be connected. I think that when our system is taxed for whatever reason, you can go back to being a guinea pig and, you know, try all the things about mold in your house or things that you haven't considered maybe contributing to any of those problems. There are doctors, naturopaths, or whatever, different kinds of doctors that are looking at not each specific disorder, but systemically what's going on in somebody's system where it shows up in different places. And it may be that they're all linked. We don't really know that. So the simple answer is yes, there are other conditions. Often people with misophonia are and since there's no diagnosis for misophonia disorder, right? As a therapist, I often diagnose for purposes of their insurance billing an anxiety disorder because you're anxious about this thing, even if you weren't anxious to begin with. And so we're working toward the anxiety part of it. There's a lot of overlap in what I see with OCD or OCD-ish kinds of, it's like there's a sense of there's a right way to do things. And when things are not done this way, that it feel to me like they're right, then I get very upset. Well, it's certainly not right for that person to be doing that thing over there that they're doing that I think is rude and obnoxious, and how many times I've already told them and whatever. So there's a sort of a rigidity that comes up and a rightness. And then there's the judgmental part that goes with it. But OCD has a lot of overlap. Anxiety does. It may turn out many people who dig around a bit say, you know what, there was this traumatic event that happened. Not everybody remembers a traumatic event in their history that's linked to any of the problems that they have, but there may have been one somewhere along the line, and it may be the neurological system is just hyperactivated because of something that, you know, isn't visible. The problem with most of these things is they're not visible. It's very hard to explain something to someone else that they can't see. They can see if you're in a wheelchair and they know that you need help opening the door, but they can't see that you're having trouble with a particular sound. So it puts it on you, unfortunately, to have to be explaining it to people, which adds another burden for a lot of people because they're uncomfortable saying anything or explaining it. Then they've got double. They've got the problem and they've got the I can't talk about it. And it's a secret, and that makes it even harder emotionally to contain it. Sometimes the simplest thing to do in the long run is to develop the ability to say, I'm having this issue, this problem, whether I name it or not. I'm having trouble with the sound that's going on around me. Could you chew that gum later? Here, I'll give you a pack of gum. You can go have this gum after the class that we're in right now, instead of right now. There are a lot of ways that these things are all overlapping, I think.
Yeah, and I've heard of a bunch about lately about trauma response, but yeah, you're right. It's invisible, but I feel like there's some interesting research or therapies related to that. Maybe we'll get into that later. I want to, just looking at the questions and our schedule, I do want to talk about more, go back to talking about OT stuff, because there've been a couple of questions come in, and then I've seen Jenna jump into the chat a little bit. Real quick, there's some other random, well, I don't want to say random, but other questions that maybe we can address to get off the plate here. Genetic component for misophonia, I can say that there's no gene, but 23andMe did some online questionnaire where they asked folks who submitted their DNA material, do you have misophonia? They supposedly found a genetic marker which is more prevalent in people who were self-reported that they had misophonia. So this is not like an official, maybe like a full like a scientific research, like a peer-reviewed research outcome, but there's no known gene, so that we don't know if it's genetic. Now, I've talked to a lot of people who have family members and parents who have had misophonia. I don't maybe the panelists can talk to this, but I don't know of any proven genetic indication to misophonia.
Can I
And
speak to that, Adil?
Yeah.
Can I
Mhm.
kind of speak? So here's the thing, and honestly, I
And
was
I don't
trying to
think
think
I
the
don't
other-
think it shows up in a blood test. That's
No, I
I
don't
don't know.
think so yet either.
Yeah,
But
I'd be curious to hear if that is the case, but that was another question
well,
from Heather.
what I have for you is 25 years of raw data, and I was trying to think the other day, and I am pretty sure I have probably seen the most people with misophonia in the world. I think I probably have, probably more than Jolene even, because I've been doing this for 25 years, and I can't tell you how many thousands of people I've seen. And so I have their histories, and I usually ask them, is there anyone else in your family that has this? So I track this from the very beginning. I began asking those questions, and I have found a stream. I have found several streams. I can't document it, but there certainly are streams of some kind of sensory issue type thingy that runs through these families. And weirdly, there's also an awful lot of people with engineering and math degrees,
Yeah, you
which
mentioned
is
that before.
unusual. And I've said this at different conferences, and I hope somebody does come up with, wouldn't it be nice if they just found a defective gene and they could say, aha, there it is. Now we know what it is. But here's the other thing, Adil, and I don't know if you've ever heard this. Do you think misophonia is catching?
Because that's a whole other topic, which we might not have time for. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is it because of the internet and blah 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 blah, Facebook blah blah blah? Is it just kind of catching on with people because people now have a name for it?
Actually, I don't
think
even
so.
mean that. I mean,
okay.
if you have misophonia, doesn't your
Like
entire
COVID?
family develop
I
it?
see. Yeah.
I think it's possible. I
Yeah.
think that the patterns can be picked up, and I'm basing that on some of the reports from my families, and again, it's whether it's erroneous or not, the brain is learning a pattern that we don't want, but it can learn that pattern.
Yeah, it's come up in discussions in the Misophonia Convention as to, like, if you have misophonia and you have kids, how much of a spotlight should you, like, how much should you talk about it with your kids? And most of us just anecdotally decide we just don't want to put a spotlight on it because we don't know how it can, because there have been cases where, yeah, if you talk to somebody about it, they suddenly become more sensitive to it. And the last thing we would want is our kids to pick it up. I don't think there's anything been proven, but yeah, I think I agree with all you guys or all you panelists that there's something that gets picked up.
One thing that I've noticed, excuse me, Adil. One thing that I've noticed, I think of, no offense to people who have misophonia, but I think there's a lot of suggestibility. There's, like, it's the reason that I don't like questionnaires that people use where they have a long list. Which of these things bother you? Because it seems to me like one of the things that happens is, like, going down the list, you go, oh, I never thought about that. Well, let me start looking for that thing. So I don't give people a list. I'll ask them what bothers you, but without giving more. I think there's that suggestibility aspect.
That's a good term. Yeah, suggestibility.
It makes you, like, more aware of something and brings your attention to something that you weren't aware of before. And I think that's part of the contagion Marcia's talking about. Like, everybody in the family ends up watching out for those sounds. They start being reactive on behalf of that other person. Now I know that bothers you. I'm going to watch out for it. I kind of think that's a very nice, in sort of a strange way. It's a very generous kind of thing for a family member to relate and understand and be that sympathetic, that they become more aware of that than they ever were before.
So
I
what
have
I
a-
think,
I have a favorite story about that briefly. Just husband and wife had meso. Big thing was people chewing a particular substance, and on the bus, somebody's doing that, and he jumped up and yelled at this person and got after them and sat back down by his wife, and his wife said, "I didn't hear it."
yeah. Well, yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, getting back to what the suggestibility that, yeah, the Jolene had said, something that crossed my mind, and I don't want to. I'm old, so I'm probably gonna forget. But the idea of walking on eggshells, it seems to be something that is common. A lot of the folks that I talked to at some point early on in their life, they had to walk on eggshells, whether it was an angry parent or something happened. And I think maybe the suggestibility, even now, is like when I think that's kind of what sort of what Julian was talking about, is like a family member is trying to is now extra cautious, and then there's some walking on eggshells, and that could be part of what kind of turns into a more of a misophonia reaction. But yeah, walking on eggshells is just something that comes up in pretty much every episode I talk about. Okay, so Jenna has been waiting patiently. She's been answering some questions a little bit on the Q&A and chat about OT treatments, and was mentioning things like, I mean, fascinating things I want to hear about: zones of regulation, safe and sound protocol, neurofeedback. Would you like to, have the floor and talk a little bit about current
Yeah.
OT treatments?
And I was going to just add to what you guys were just talking about, the suggestibility. That's why including family members in your therapy approach is so critical, because there may be some family members that are with the client. They're the ones dragging them in, saying, we're going to try this. But then there are other family members that actually think it's bogus, and they're deliberately making things worse. And I might actually say, I want to see that person. I want that person in here. I want to and are you sharing this information with that family member to help them understand what you're going through? And Adeel, I think you may have used the analogy earlier. If you have someone with a broken leg, you're not going to walk through a doorway and expect them to, with their own crutches. You're going to support them. You're going to make an effort to try to help them in their healing process. Why wouldn't you do the same thing for your family member with misophonia? And I have very kind ways of getting my point across, but I'm pretty adamant about teaching the person with misophonia to be their own advocate. But I'm also going to help them in the immediate until they develop that skill. I'm going to be the part of that process. From a therapy standpoint, you guys have already talked about so much of this. It's multi-pronged. And so I use sort of a top-down approach, using cognitive strategies that we're going to put in place immediately to try to come up with a compensation or accommodations for certain environments, certain situations. But the ultimate long-term goal is going to take some type of body-based therapy. In my experience, it depends on how severe the misophonia is. If it's mild misophonia, then some of the cognitive strategies might be enough. I've had clients that have been successful managing the misophonia with just the cognitive strategies. But there are a lot of people that need more than that. And so some of the things that I do, and again, it's combining. I use sound-based therapies. I have found that I'm trained in 4 different programs. The one that I found that it seems to be more helpful, and I will tell you, I've only been trained in the Safe and Sound protocol with Dr. Stephen Porges for about a year. And so I have a very small sample, but I will say that I've had 3 of my misophonia clients, 3 out of 5 who have been willing to try it. 2 didn't stick with it. And the 3 that kept up with it actually benefited from it. And again, I'm doing it in conjunction with other things, so I can't say it was specific to Safe and Sound. But so I use the sound-based therapies. I use neurofeedback. Not many OTs are trained in neurofeedback. So a lot of the approaches that I use, for instance, the Safe and Sound, that's not specific to OT. There are a lot of different professionals that may have that training and the polyvagal theory and the different approaches and exercises and things that you can use to help calm that nervous system down. I use a program called Zones of Regulation, sort of as my go-to for trying to present a framework for people to understand and start to become self-aware of what I call their arousal zones. Are they, and I try to help them understand, if you think about the zones as blue being low energy, low arousal for their brain and their body, green is where we want to be most of the time. Yellow is when our arousal level is a little bit heightened. It could be a good scenario. It could be you're excited because your favorite relative just surprised you and they're coming into town for a visit, or it could be anxiety, worry. Obviously with the misophonia, it might even be knowing that they've got to go have a family reunion meal and they're already getting anxious about it. And then there's the red zone where things you lose control. And so part of what I do is help coaching them to be aware of which zone is their body in that moment, catching things early and helping them figure out what strategies that they can use. And those strategies are going to vary. They can't use some of the strategies that they use at home. They're not going to be able to use in a classroom, or they're not going to be able to use them riding in the car. So, trying to offer a lot of suggestions and then coaching them on using the strategies. One of the first questions I ask when people come in from week to week is, all right, tell me what did you use? Did you have any success? Or even if you didn't have success, what strategy did you use? And trying to get them to buy in, because what I do in 1 hour a week is not, as Jolene pointed out, I don't have a magic wand. And this is an active process. This is, I do try to explain that if your brain has learned this error, it can unlearn it, but it's going to take time and it's going to take practice, daily practice. And the hardest clients that I've had that it seems to take a lot more effort to make progress. And I hope that this does not offend anyone in the audience, but it tends to be the clients that are also on the spectrum, younger clients, because they have a harder time taking someone else's perspective. And sometimes there's some of the language barriers that make it a little more difficult to make the point of trying to help them understand, why do I need to change something about what I'm doing? And I always say, you can only control you. And so this is why we need to figure out what you can do to help yourself. So that was kind of a all-encompassing answer. Does anyone have any specific questions to that?
Jillian, go ahead.
I have a comment about that. I totally get what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. The thing about it being, I tell people when kids first have this disorder, they think the problem is over there. It's that thing that you're doing. And if you would just stop doing that thing you're doing, I'd be just fine. Until you realize that not everybody's reacting to that thing. So maybe it isn't what you're doing. Maybe it's what my brain is doing. My neurological system is doing with the thing that you're doing. So the bad news is, this is the way I put it, the bad news is that means it's your job to figure out how you're going to manage it with, help. That's why I'm here to help you. The good news is it's your job. That means you don't have to wait for anybody else to change what they're doing, because they are very likely not going to be able to change, even if they wanted to. Some of those things that bother you, I won't name those things, but you all know there are things that other people do that they cannot help but do. They have to in order to be alive. So they're not going to stop doing that thing. That means you get to be in charge. You get to be in control. Take back the control onto you, and then you don't have to wait for somebody else to fix it. Now let's get on with my helping you figure out what are some of those ways that you can do that.
I was going to add to, one of my favorite things to do is I ask every person that I work with that has misophonia to use visual imagery, essentially, and to create a story around their misophonia. And this can be really fun. And if they don't mind, I'll have them draw a picture of what they feel like misophonia is. And I actually have some of the artwork. And then I'll have them create a picture, and I'll use an example. I'll explain that in a second. I'll have them create a story around that picture of how they conquer the misophonia. So one young lady that I'm working with right now is a high school student, and she said, it feels like sharks eating my brain. And I want to point out to parents or clinicians or whoever else is listening to this webinar that the pain that these people are experiencing is real. It is very real. And to negate it is heartbreaking in my mind and tragic. And this young lady, to use that analogy, should be pretty graphic. And so she was having a hard time coming up with a story about how she was going to conquer these sharks eating her brain. So I gave her 2 suggestions, and then I said, now I want you to go home and I want you to create your own story. But I wanted to just share with you, like my suggestion was, imagine picking the shark up by the tail. You can see the shark flapping around, snapping its jaws, and you're going to pick all of his teeth out. Okay, because you're going to use humor to interrupt this process or this sequence or pattern that's happening in your brain. Another way to do that, another client is they're going to push a button and they're going to be covered, because this was someone that was into video games, they're going to be covered with this metal suit, and that was going to become their suit, their misophonia suit, to protect themselves. One little boy who was very much into military history, and his father was his main trigger with some of the sounds that he produced. And the little boy drew a picture of a battle scene. And what we came up with, and because he was younger, he had a little more trouble creating this on his own, so I helped him. And what we came up with is that when he gets triggered by these sounds, that it is actually a miscommunication, an error, a tactical error, and he's attacking his ally. And so it's just, trying to really pull in any and all strategies that we can, and different approaches that I use. It depends on the person. The visual imagery and this humor might be the ticket for one person. For someone else, it might be something totally different. And so I don't know what's going to work for that person. So I kind of throw everything out and see what they gravitate to.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's very, very individual sometimes in the approach. So it takes an expert to help. There was a question about so the safe and sound protocol. Is there? I know I was Googling while you were talking.
Oh yeah,
and there were a bunch of links. Is there one that is kind of your kind of go to? And if there is, you can just drop it in, or if you happen to know off the
Actually,
top of your head. But
yes, there is, I actually watched a YouTube video this morning of one that I felt like, I've taken the class with Dr. Stephen Porges, and I will say that he's a very brilliant man, but I came out even as an OT who's used sound therapies before. It wasn't really clear exactly how this is working. And I did find a video this morning from someone in Australia who did a beautiful job explaining it. What I may do is escape for a second and pull that link, and then I'll put it in.
Go ahead. Yeah. And maybe
Yep.
Jillian can answer maybe the next question. But I was going to talk about, you're talking about kids and whatnot, and maybe a question that came up and comes up a lot is, how do I get school accommodations or workplace accommodations? And there's the ADA, there's stuff that people don't know that is at their disposal, not disposable, at their disposal. And maybe Jillian, you want to start with that while Jenna looks for that link.
Yeah, there are some, we've had in the past at the convention, some lawyers talking about that very subject. How do you get the work, especially the workplace accommodations? But I've written, and I know that Marcia and other people have written a lot of letters. The way that I write that letter is I explain what this is, because it's not a diagnosis they can look up. So explain what it is, how it affects this person in the classroom, for example, or in the workplace. And then here are the actual reasonable accommodations we're requesting. So this comes out of the Americans with Disabilities Act legislation, which was passed a long time ago. And when it originally was put in, it was at a time when, in order to get into that classroom, that school, you had to climb the stairs because there was no such thing as ramps for corners on the street or for getting into buildings. And somebody sued, whoever it was they sued, and they said, this isn't right. My kid has the academic capability of managing 5th grade or whatever it was, but can't get into the classroom. You're denying my child an education, and my taxes are paying for this and whatever. So they ended up passing this law to make the classroom, the school building, other buildings accessible. Well, by extension of that, how do we make it accessible for people who have other things that are preventing them from being on level ground with other people? Maybe they need to have an interpreter who's translating for them into sign language, or maybe they need to have some accommodation for their visual impairment if they can't see, but they're perfectly smart enough they could pass the class if they could be there. So same thing with this. My kid has the capability of doing whatever this work is. And by the way, I have yet to meet a person with misophonia who is not also very smart. I have theories about that. I think it's a neurological thing that you have a reactivity because your brain is very, very active. But the flip side is you have an awful lot of smarts going on because your brain, I think, is just extremely active and puts things together. So you've got this person who's perfectly capable of this academic thing, and all they need is permission to whatever, get up and leave if they're upset by something, sit in the part of the classroom or in their workplace that is the easiest for them to manage, whatever that may be allowed to wear headphones or earplugs or whatever for classroom, for tests, be able to take tests in a separate room, things like that. And they are reasonable accommodations. And if a school wants to, or a workplace wants to argue that or deny that, and you have a letter that is stating that this is a medical need for you, that company or that school is at risk of being challenged in the courts for denying somebody's legal rights. I think that's what's happening in that court case that Adil mentioned earlier with the bravo for that girl. I want to get that family is involved in the convention because they're taking a stand that's going to help everybody, we hope, eventually.
Yeah, their lawyer might come on the podcast sometime this summer. So
well, I'd like him to come in the convention.
if you don't have his contact info, I have his contact info, so we can make that happen. But
and I would like to address this question if possible.
Yeah.
I've given I've given this talk at our conventions, by the way. So this is available too on those videos if you want to go to the Misophonia Association. But your easiest route to get accommodation for an elementary student or high school student is actually to visit an audiologist, because an audiologist can do the testing and can do the evaluation. And we actually have a diagnostic condition called abnormal auditory perception. It's an actual diagnostic code that will allow your child to be considered eligible for the 504 programs. I've never had a child turned down for this. It's easy. And if you can't get the audiologist to do it or something, you have them call us or have them call me and I'll help them through it. And this, if you go to psychology, what they have to give you is like anxiety disorder or something else. They have other condition names because right now they technically don't have a misophonia diagnostic code, but these are very easy to get for either work, college. They're not hard. We can renew them. Honestly, I hope that satisfies your question, because hearing is one of the senses that's protected under the American Disabilities Act of 1999.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And a lot of people don't know that, but yeah, 504 planning, I think it's called. Is that what people would go to their guidance counselor or their HR and say, like literally
Yeah,
504?
the
Would they say
school-
ADA?
A child study
Okay.
is where things start, is that they
Okay.
need to start with having a child study, and the school, by law, is required to respond within a certain amount of time. And if any family is having pushback from the school system, then they can hire an advocate that will work on their behalf to get the services that they need. Hopefully, they wouldn't have to go to that point, but that is an option as well.
Good to know.
So this is easier to do, and it's really important that you do it actually, because sometimes, again, misophonia is most often perceived as a behavioral issue in children. They are seen as just not being nice, they're not cooperative, they're oppositional. The teachers and everybody in the school kind of needs to understand what misophonia is and how come they're reacting in this way and what can be done to help them. Because I think teachers are well-meaning and they do want to help the kids. It's just, they're just thinking, you know, maybe he doesn't want to sit down and do his math or something. They don't get it, that the sniffer next to him is going to drive him crazy. So yeah, don't worry about that. If you need help, we can help you too at the Misophonia Association. Just point you to the right direction all the way through college.
Yep. So we've had a couple questions come in that actually dovetail with kind of what I had as kind of maybe my next topic, which was kind of related conditions. I know we brushed upon this before about kind of comorbid conditions. Misokinesia, visual triggers is one of them, but somebody was asking about, sorry, and let me scroll back here. Yeah, Arlene was asking, my family member is taking meds for ADHD. Idiot, and has always understood this was his disorder. He recently brought up that he believes he has misophonia. Whereas, how complex does it become if he has both? I mean, ADHD, ADD is one comorbid thing. There's, Jillian had mentioned OCD. I can probably think of others, but misokinesia being the biggest one. But like, can you talk about like, that was an interesting question about how complex is it when somebody has both? Like, how do you start to approach these things differently or the same? Jillian, you raised your hand.
I sometimes think, excuse me, Marcia, I sometimes think that that people who are diagnosed ADHD may be misdiagnosed. Maybe they do have ADHD, but maybe that sound over there and that sound over there and that thing over there that's bothering me makes me look like I'm distracted and I'm not sitting still. Maybe they have misophonia or misokinesia, not ADHD. Maybe they do, but maybe they don't.
That's what I was going to say too. That's often a misdiagnosis. Please look at misophonia like somebody bringing a nice jar into your room and it's full of yellow jackets and they open the lid and just set it on the floor. And now we're going to give you a math test. How you doing? And they only like you. They only want to sting you. How well can you concentrate? And this
Right.
is, then they're like, oh, he must have ADHD. So they dose them and give them medicine for that. But the way to find out is to ask the families and the parents, how are they when they're by themselves and they're not around these trigger situations? And they're like, oh, they can write a 10-page novel, and you're like, well, they need to do more exploration and not just slap labels on people, honestly.
Yeah, it's tough when I tell people like misophonia is it's something that everyone can say that a lot of people say that they're annoyed about, so immediately they assume that you're just a more crabbier version of a common annoyance, and so we have to get over that communication gap or marketing gap. Anyways, and yeah, so okay, so if other people have more questions about related conditions, I've heard of like bipolar and other things kind of be comorbid, but not necessarily like related. Maybe they can share in the chat. I want to talk about families, and I know we have some pretty amazing experts here on the issue of families and misophonia. One thing that the question came up to me as I think Jenna and Jolene were talking was as especially Jenna was talking about how you try to get the kind of the maybe the biggest trigger person in the room to make sure that they kind of understand what's going on. How do you deal with you probably all of you have dealt with maybe unsympathetic family members. How do you deal with some of the most unsympathetic family members? Like, what are some of your tactics? And this could probably apply to a lot of situations, but I'm just curious, maybe what are some of the worst stories that you've come across?
I had a family where one of the things the kid had trouble with was a particular kind of fruit. I don't like naming triggers, as I mentioned before, and some of the comments that are showing up in the chat have a lot of triggers named, and I just caution people to, when you're reading them, skim over them, whatever. But there was a particular kind of fruit this kid was not allergic to, but had trouble with the smell of this particular fruit. And everybody in the family just so happened to like this particular fruit. And there was a lot of drama about this whole thing. And I said to the mom, kind of in a way what Marcia is saying and what Jenna has said, I said, if your kid had an allergy to peanuts, would you have peanuts in the house? Would you be eating peanuts around that kid? If they're going to go into anaphylactic shock and they're going to end up in the ER because they can't breathe, would you have peanuts in the house? No, you would not, because you're a decent parent. You want to do the right thing by your kid. You would be as aware as you possibly could that they didn't have peanuts around. So why is this any different? Well, it's different because it's weird, because nobody's ever heard of it, because it's different, because it's an unusual thing to be sensitive to. But that doesn't make it any less real.
Yeah. And I'll add
Jenna,
in, so I think some of the toughest family members are siblings, especially if they're younger and they don't have the maturity to be able to understand and empathize and get it. So that's tougher. That's a very difficult situation. When it comes to other family members, again, trying to educate them as much as possible. And I do prefer that the client that I'm working with be the one that's approaching them and giving them information to help educate them. But I also encourage them to find scenarios where they can be around that family member without triggers. Being outside is a big positive because the sounds are very different. Movement, so going for a walk or going for a bike ride, just trying to find ways that they can have positive experiences with that family member to try to heal some of the damage. And I guess pair that with the education so that hopefully there's going to be a meeting in the middle. That makes sense.
No, that's a great idea. And I mean, those things, like, even if there wasn't misophonia, those are positive reinforcing things anyways. So you're not like doing anything that should be out of the way.
I will say, if you asked like a funny story, so I had
Yes.
a college
Crazy
student,
story, funny story, whatever.
college student whose mother was her biggest trigger. And it was one of those where I felt like I was developing misophonia with the mom because, and I know I'm not supposed to mention any triggers because it was so obvious with her behavior. And I finally had to be honest with her, with the mother, even on the telephone. I said, I have got to tell you, I'm going to give you some feedback here. Don't be offended, but you are kind of loud when you do blah, blah, blah. And you do it all the time, every single conversation. And I don't say it quite like that. I find kind ways to do it, but I have had to be honest with that family member and go, it's an issue. It's a thing. So it's almost like poking the bear. If you want to help your kiddo, you might want to try not doing that when you're talking on the phone, when you're talking with your family members. But it was something she could control, by the way.
Yeah, that
I'd
was super.
like to-
Marcia,
I'd
yeah,
like
go ahead.
to-
Go ahead, please.
This is a very interesting question. Good questions, audience, this time. Amazing. You're the best so far. You get an A+. Disturbing the family constellation is something that misophonia does extremely well. I gave a lecture on this one time. It's just hard to even begin to describe how it works, but I'll mention one thing that comes up repeatedly, and I find this is a tragedy, a bit of a tragedy. It's not a very positive comment, but I want to make it clear and speak about it, which is that generally speaking, when children develop misophonia, and it comes on rather quickly in almost all cases. There are some slow cases or some that show up in their 20s, but this average kid is between 8 and 13 years old. And these kids have perfectly normally developing childhoods, almost all of them. They have their milestones, they're great students, they're nice kids, and it's a little bit like lightning striking. And I like to use that analogy because the kid is confused. They're so young, they can't really even describe what's happening. A lot of the time they just cry or get upset or run away, and they don't have the vocabulary yet or the emotional maturity. So the mother is almost invariably, the mother attempts to protect the child. The mother tries to figure out how to solve this problem. That's what mothers do. You know, you get dirty, I'll make you a warm bath. You're hungry, I'll fix you a sandwich, whatever is going to be here. So oftentimes in my experience, unfortunately, there are many adult males, the dads, who often have the role of being a trigger. There are other people that are triggers too, but if you have to pick one, I think a lot of the times it is more often than not, it's the father. And so the mother gets in this role between the child and the father. They're trying to protect the child. The father is just trying to eat and live and breathe and not quite understanding how serious maybe this is. And this creates a great difficulty in this family. Or it's a sibling. And so then the mother is choosing her Sophie's choice between this child who's clearly distraught and very upset, and that child who's just a 6-year-old that's eating. So these situations are really not that funny, but it is good if the family eventually, as you go along, if they can treat it as some sort of negotiation where we list down the most difficult situations, and then we find solutions. We create solutions that we're going to try, and then we'll reevaluate. So the most common thing that comes up in families is the loss of the family dinner table. And this is a very difficult thing for families. And however, luckily, there are many solutions that can be tried. And that's what your people that are helping you will walk you through. What are the choices? How many choices do I have? And, you know, I always like to bring up medieval days when the king ate first, and then, you know, then the queen ate, and then the children got a little something over there, and we're sent off to bed at 6 o'clock. And so it isn't always that we sat around a table, and that we eat at the same time together, but that's an American habit. So I'll just stop there, but
And
I think this is the tragedy of misophonia for me.
Yeah, Jenna.
I was going to add in, because I know mealtime is one of the biggest issues that parents tend to have. We can't eat with our kid. We haven't eaten with our child for a year. And I would agree with Marcia. There are so many different ways to tackle that. If that is one of the biggest triggering situations for the client, then we're not starting with a meal. We're going to start trying to make progress in other areas. And if it's a goal for the whole family to eat together, then we may tackle that, but it certainly won't be the first thing that we're doing. Some of the suggestions that, and Marcia, you just mentioned this, is you have the person with misophonia eat separately. And what I encourage is that they sit down and they eat with a family member sitting with them, and then they can excuse themselves and the family members can finish the meal separately. Or you all work together to make the meal, and then that person can go to another room, eat outside whenever you can. But again, because the sound is very different outside than it is in. But trying to coach the parents that this may not happen. And they always ask, but why can Susie eat with her friends, but they can't eat with us? And that's a very difficult thing to explain about misophonia. And sometimes I'm going to tell them, I don't have an answer to that other than it is typical. It is not you. It is a typical scenario with misophonia. Try not to take it personally, which is easier said than done. But.
Hey, Jenna,
Yeah.
I wrote an article on sound prints. So every sound in the world has a fingerprint, like your fingerprints. They're all different. And your brain, with its 70,000 cells and billions of brain cells, it grabs onto that sound as a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that this pattern means chocolate and that pattern means a rose. These brains of misophones, they grab onto patterns associated that are extremely specific. So because people always say that, well, I can eat that, it doesn't bother her. It's really an amazing thing about the human brain.
Yeah, the only and that's very true. Yeah, I like all those answers about especially the meal table. I've heard of dads like maybe not sitting while they're eating, just kind of like being the family's eating and they're just kind of like kind of standing and eating or sitting or just being mobile basically. And so that's one way to like the misophonia person feels like it's understood that they can move around but they're still around the same room, or eating quickly and then doing the dishes. So you're still in the area and you're doing something helpful. So, I've heard those things.
Using noise generating devices in the background, or allowing the person to wear the noise generator or play music while they're listening. And sometimes that tends to be where you've got to convince the parent to let them do this. So it just.
Well, let's remember that eating is just fueling. It's just feeding. Yeah, my husband can eat dinner in 5 minutes. He can just put it right in there. I mean, it's the together time. Try to identify for the family, what is it you're missing? It's sitting around the table. But you know what? We don't need to eat. We can play games. We can have fun. We can have conversation. And, America's too fat anyway. So, you can just see it as fueling and then do the fun thing together and get that family close to us and stop people from snacking all the time. It's ridiculous, honestly.
It's pushed by the snacking industry, but that's another story.
Especially in the car where there's noise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard, a lot of kids. I heard somebody was talking about how when she was growing up, like the leather upholstery on her car was completely chewed up because she would just be screaming into the upholstery of her car. of that like leather station wagon from the 70s on long road trips.
Seriously, really?
Yeah. There's somebody. Yeah, she was. Yeah,
One of the
her.
first things I usually bring to families is I say, your family must never go to fast food and eat in the car, period. You're going to be like the French people. You get your fast food, take it home and eat it, or you get out of the car. This is the most difficult situation for these younger people that can't drive themselves, to be stuck in that car. So chewing up the upholstery, pretty
Mhm.
good choice, actually.
So we were talking about so we're talking about kids and families. Some people have asked about, I don't know if it was in chat or I know in general, like adults, like what about just kind of that one relationship between two people who, you know, have a life experience, you'd think, that are kind of self-aware, and they all probably think that they're self-aware. And so how do you explain to them that maybe they're missing something, or they're not understanding something, or how do you explain it without, you know, making everyone take it personally? I know, I'm sure everyone's dealt with this, but
Are you
Julie,
referring to, how do you explain to the misophonia client or to their significant
yeah,
other?
no, to their significant other. So
Oh,
yeah,
oh.
you have two people who, yeah, Julie,
So every year at the convention, I've
you
done,
do a talk, yeah.
I've done a discussion group. Great. We
Oh
have
yes,
breakout groups.
yeah.
And I have a breakout group that is for the family members, the spouses or significant others of the person with misophonia. And so we approach some of these things. And first of all, one thing that is important for the person with misophonia to know is that they're not the only one who ends up having an issue. It's not their problem only. It becomes a family and relational problem for the other members of the family. But when we talk, so let's say the spouses of people with misophonia, they find out that there are other people who have this issue. It's not just them. It's a real thing. It's not just that their spouse is a pain in the ass, even though they may be a pain in the ass anyway, but that's not the point. They understand, they come to understand better what is going on, that this person's not reacting, you know, intentionally to them, and back to the taking it personal business. It's a real issue. I've talked with a lot of couples where it's definitely a concern. So I think they both have to understand that this problem is affecting both of them in different ways. And so some kind of generosity and grace, give and take on both sides, is helpful.
Yep. No, very, very true. Okay, so let's see. I'm looking at some of the questions.
Can I jump in
Oh
for a
yeah,
second?
please.
I've noticed there've been a couple of questions about ADHD and misophonia, and we've talked about it, but I was just going to throw in, if I know someone has both ADHD and misophonia, just like what we talked about before, it might be that the misophonia is presenting, the results or the effects of misophonia are presenting as ADHD. So you target the misophonia first, even if you don't know what's causing what. My go-to, if whether it's misophonia or what I would consider typical sensory processing hypersensitivities, that's my number one target. That is the priority, because you want to calm the nervous system down. And if someone is in hyper alert, hyper awareness state, then they're not going to be able to focus and attend. And it impacts everything else. So it is my number one priority when I find out that there's any type of hypersensitivity, whether it's to smell, taste, touch, sound, you name it. So I just wanted, because I saw that pop up in the chat, so I wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. 88, right. No, that's, and there was another that kind of reminds me of somebody else's question, Stephen, who said, I'm also easily startled. Is this related or a different issue related to stress and anxiety? And I can't believe we hadn't mentioned, I hadn't mentioned early on that just lowering stress, getting a good night's sleep. Like when I get paid, or when I'm in a low stress environment, something good happens, I find I'm much more able to handle misophonia and get or like basically shake it off or get triggered less. And this person said, i.e., dog barks when someone comes to the door and or it's something drops funny, he gets like super startled. Do you want to talk about like, yeah, like the relationship between stress and misophonia, basically?
Well,
Because there's a high
that's
one.
enormous. I mean, that's an enormous factor for any
Yeah.
condition that you have. If you have, some heart palpitations or something and stress, I mean, we're just one being. But it's interesting that the difficulty, I think one of the things with misophonia that is hard is that sometimes, again, the characteristics of the disorder are that the people closest to you are your biggest triggers. So when you're spending time with your family, whether you're a grown-up or a child, and your biggest triggers are your family, before you even go to an event or go to a gathering, you're under stress in anticipation already, because you sort of know what's going to happen. And like I had mentioned before, I talked about respite sessions. So when you do go to a family, I've coached a lot of people through these. If you get to a family event and you're a grown up and they want you to come home for Thanksgiving, you do things, you take steps, you spend the money for the hotel room, you create time and period when you're able to go, and then you let yourself have times and periods when you're going to go back and recover, and you schedule it in and you don't feel bad about it. It's like somebody that has any sort of condition, but stress also, in a funny way, it also is very interesting with tinnitus and other ear conditions. The ear itself is a hormone receptor instrument. It's an organ filled with hormone receptors. And so when you become stressed, you have a lot of hormones you produce, adrenaline and cortisol, in your body and your brain, and it also permeates the auditory system. So when you think about your hearing in general, if you're just in your yard on this day, if I was outside, it's a nice day, I'm just out there, I'm not particularly on high alert with my hearing. But if I'm walking down a really dark street in a parking lot or something late at night, and I'm the only one there, and there's some movement over there, and my hearing is going to increase 100-fold. It's a natural thing. I'm going to be very acutely aware of every sound around me and looking. And the mesophone, I think they suffer quite a bit of traumatic stress and maybe even PTSD. So they understand that these sounds are going to be their enemies. And when they come into a situation, they're stressed and their listening capacity has gone up 100-fold. Sometimes the things that trigger them, no one else in the room can hear. Have you noticed that? I mean, that's kind of a fact. So it's a very interesting question, Adele, because if you could somehow control your stress level, and when you're least stressed, maybe you would handle your misophonia better.
That's the key is, let's say you got somebody who's kind of calm, cool, and collected, and their baseline is here, and you have someone with misophonia who is so constantly triggered, they're here. And one of the goals of therapy is to try to slowly but surely bring down their baseline so that they're not as triggered as drastically, hopefully not as often, but that their response is not going to be as significant. So this takes time. There's nothing fast about this, but trying to teach them strategies, and it might be heart rate variability training, it might be effective breathing, which is with you everywhere you go and free, and you can use it without anybody knowing what you're doing. But over time, trying to get them in a better place, and they're going to be more likely to be able to manage. But also, when you're triggered into fight or flight, your frontal lobe shuts down. So we want to be in a position where we can think about access and choose a strategy that's going to help us. So again, trying to get that calm down.
Jolene, you had something to say there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to understand the difference between fear and anxiety. So fear is a normal, healthy survival reaction to something that's potentially life-threatening. Saber-toothed tiger jumping out from behind the tree. You know, caveman would get charged up with adrenaline because it was useful. Fight, flight, had to do that to survive. Anxiety is if the caveman goes back to that part of the forest near that particular tree, and there's no sound coming around from that tree, but he gets all charged up full of adrenaline all of a sudden, that's anxiety. It's a thinking problem. He's thinking about what could happen, what might happen, what happened last time. So one way to manage anticipatory anxiety is to stay in the present. So right now I'm fine. Right now things are okay. Right now I'm in a calm state, and not be borrowing trouble from the future by throwing myself into a what if this happens and how am I going to stand that? And what if is always followed by something bad. Try following it by something different, like, well, what if I'm okay? What if I calm myself down faster this time now that I have some tools? Think of it in more of a positive light, and remember that anxiety is not a thing that's happening now. It's a thing you're telling yourself, your brain is you're telling your brain could happen, but your body starts acting like it's happening now because your brain doesn't know the difference. Truly, it doesn't. I demonstrate that, but that's not what we're here for. But yeah, so if you have anticipatory anxiety, oh my God, I'm going to go there and this is going to happen. Well, maybe it is. But does it help you prepare yourself by worrying yourself to death and spending the hour before you get there being all upset about it? No, it just messes up the hour before you get there. If that helped, then go ahead and do it. But it doesn't seem to help. It doesn't make it any less of a problem once you get there. So you might as well calm yourself down, stay present in the moment, ground yourself here now. And then when you get there, if that thing happens, you'll deal with that thing happening then.
We just need you to follow us around and tell us that every day, all day long.
No, you need me to get you to the point where you remind yourself of that all day long.
I'm just saying,
We'll
it's
have
got
you
to
in
be the
those,
number one
in our
issue.
earbuds. Yeah.
It's got to be the number one issue, because these individuals that have misophonia are very intelligent. They're good predictors. They've had a lot of history that tells them. I always use the example, when you walk out your front door, your neighbor comes over and slaps your face. It doesn't take you more than one time to look out the door the next time to see if he's coming over. We're very quick learners. And so,
totally, but you don't want to never go out the door because your neighbor might come over.
That's right.
Just be aware of that neighbor.
And run faster than he does.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's interesting scenario. There was one question that just came up, Heather. I think Sherry's give you a thumbs up for your analogies. I think it's you who mentioned something about at least fidget spinners, but somebody thought they'd heard something about video games being good for kids. Was anyone talking about that, or?
Marsha brought that up.
No, that was me, because there's a lot of studies coming out right now, because one thing parents have said to me is, oh, they're in their room and they put the headphones on, they play video games. And there is some really fascinating work coming out showing children that do have attention issues or difficulties, they find a lot of relief and satisfaction in entering these virtual worlds. And, apparently it doesn't affect their ability to succeed academically. And so, I think it's worth exploring. I've always wished, I think I've said this at a few things, I wish somebody would create a misophonia video game. I wish there would be an educational game for young children, middle children, older people, that you could enter this world and learn about things about misophonia, and you could run after things or whatever. It could be a fantasy.
Maybe
edition.
that shark, maybe that
Yes.
pulling
Yeah.
that.
So
Right.
you could shoot the things that make the sounds you don't like. It would be some kind of relief, I'm not saying we should do shooting, of course, but I'm just saying you could put a water balloon on them or something. That's something, a whole area we really need to look at.
Can I comment about the video games?
Yeah, go ahead.
My concern, because I see sort of the flip side from some of the clients that we work with is that these kids are becoming addicted to it. So I would say use the video games, but keep it under control, keep it at a minimum. It is becoming an epidemic. And so I would just say use good common sense with it, just like with any other strategy that you're using.
Yeah, balance with other things. I mean, I used to play a lot of video games as I was a kid, but I haven't touched one in decades. So you keep things back, keep them doing other stuff too, but maybe explore video games as well. Jolene, did you have something that you wanted to add there? I saw your hand go up maybe.
I did, but it just slipped out of my grasp. I'll catch it somewhere along the
Okay.
line, toss it back.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. Laughing and lightening up is yes. Well, humor. The last comment there. Yeah, humor. By the way, is like I tell people is a great coping mechanism if you can somehow, as long as it's not mean. If you even laughing about misophonia can be therapeutic. I don't know what it is. Somehow your brain has decreased the threat assigned to that source or whatever. Jolene, just remembered. I think
I remembered. Okay, so the thing about these characters that are in games, if we're talking about a kid in particular, children and adolescents, how would that character, who's one of your favorite characters, and how would that character handle a difficult situation, like whatever it is, and what kind of superpower does that character have? Oh, well, you know what, misophonia, if you look at the flip side of it, it does have a lot of problems that it brings along, but it also has some real benefits. What can you figure out that are some of the benefits that make your capabilities different from, and maybe even better than, somebody else, because you are not wired the same way that they are? So that could be seen as a problem, or it could be seen as a good thing. So let's look at how you can utilize the aspects of the way your neurological system works so that you can benefit from those things. And I often will have people, what are some of the things you like to do and you do well? Let's enhance those, and let's look at the ways that you can apply your supersonic, if they're going to be a superhero, what kind of superhero are you? You have supersonic ears, maybe. Where can that serve you in either a Marvel world or in the real world, to be able to hear things and notice things that other people don't? Where can you use that? And I've talked to a lot of people, adults, about how they actually have been able to utilize their extreme sensitivity in a positive way to benefit themselves, to benefit other people.
Yeah, that's a great point. No, that's a great point. Let's see. There was one other. Actually, Jenna, do you have anything else to say before we go to maybe the next topic?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, okay. I'm looking at the question to see if anything else had come up. But I did want to my next topic was going to be maybe a little bit about kind of potential causes. And I know that I think we've touched on this past, but I was reminded because I think Marcia had mentioned PTSD, and we talked maybe a little bit about potential trauma in the past. Somebody, I know that she's a listener to the podcast. I think she's in her 20s, but she said she woke up one day and had misophonia. Is this common that, one day you suddenly have it? I've definitely heard things like interesting, two totally different people developed it the day of a funeral of a loved grandmother. And, there's people who have kind of, they've noticed it over time, but a lot of it seems like more, definitely not a zero amount of people have just woke up one day and have had it. What has kind of been maybe your experiences in talking to all these people about a lot of your patients about like how it's kind of started, and can it come on right away? Yeah, please.
I would like to start out with that one because, yes, like I talk about lightning striking. Many people, if you ask them, can specifically remember the first time they experienced this phenomena. they can tell you all about it in great detail. Other ones, maybe it slowly comes on. The thing we do know is that tends to be that the triggers increase and kind of spread over time. They don't stay the same. And there are some other things, we have to look at other conditions in our work. We have to look at things like obsessive compulsive disorder, which is another problem that tends to emerge during middle school years. We can find other brain things that happen to us that we can analyze and look at and see how do these things change. And the only thing I can add, initially at least, to the discussion is what's happening to the child's body between 9 to 13. Well, we know it's called puberty. So what happens in puberty? Your hormones begin to increase dramatically, and that suffuses your brain. You're floating up there in a sea of estrogen or testosterone. And, there is some speculation, things like pandas, for example, or other situations we can examine closely and see what could it be that turns that mechanism on. We don't even understand the mechanism yet, but what turns it on? And there may be, again, there might turn out to be a dozen kinds of misophonia. We're doing what they used to do with cancer. We call it one disease. And what they figured out later on is there's hundreds and thousands of kinds of cancers, cell mutations, many of which are individual to you. So now we have the area of these gourmet drugs going in there, So I don't know, but let's just look at the sort of the practical aspects of the onset of misophonia. When does it happen? What else is going on? What other things are like it? It doesn't seem to go away. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And 75% of these kids are girls. That's the second thing. Okay.
Do you think, speaking of that though, do you think it's girls are more likely to talk about mental health kind of issues? I've thought about that as well. And most of the people in the podcast are female, but I'm wondering if, or identify as female, I should say, but I feel like men are less likely to just, they're more likely to be assumed that they're just crabby, or they're less likely to talk about stuff. I'm just curious if there's been any study.
You're definitely saying a truthful thing. And also who responds to internet surveys and who participates. The girl victims seem to hurt themselves and run away and collapse. The boy sufferers tend to break other things and hurt other people. And I've been having to actually study up on this phenomenon known as cutting this last 2 years. I've had to read articles and go in to look at it because more and more of my patients are telling me, especially middle school age, 13 to 15-year-olds, that they're doing this. And I didn't really understand what it was.
Yeah, we should content warning that maybe, but yeah, I think, that's getting some pretty heavy stuff there. Right.
May I comment about the cutting? Did I just startle you, Adela?
No.
Well, in terms of the cutting, that is something that I typically see with some of the young people. I also notice that a lot of them tend to, these two things may not be related at all, but I think that they tend to seek tattoos. And if you think about it, the process of getting a tattoo is painful. And what happens when you cut or when you get a tattoo, you're going to end up, your body's going to release endorphins. And I think that it is a way of releasing, like it's a pressure valve release. It's just a random theory that I have. I don't know if there's anyone else kind of thinks along those lines, but it's just something that I've noticed. I wanted to, if I can, offer just a couple of strategies. We've already talked about some that I think people can walk away with today and use. We've already talked about humor, creating a story in your head. Marcia has mentioned, we've talked about the noise generating devices, noise canceling headphones, movement. It is critical. It helps break up especially if you're developing tension in your body, if you can find some way of moving, whether it's getting up and moving around the room. Marcia mentioned hand fidgets, and particularly something that you can kind of pull and something that gives you some resistance is beneficial. Obviously, you chewing gum or putting something in your mouth that's going to give you input into your jaw. I like to recommend people use ice. So part of my approach is I educate people on the vagal nerve, the fight or flight response, and some of the things that you can do. So using ice, either an ice pack or holding a cold insulated cup that's in the palms of the hands on the back of the neck, or putting ice in your mouth or drinking a really cold drink. And then one of our sensory systems is called proprioception. And that is your internal awareness of where your body parts are in space. So if I close my eyes, I know that both of my arms are out at 90 degrees. My wrists are both bent forward, also at 90 degrees. I know this it's my internal GPS. And proprioception is one of the sensory systems that you cannot overdose on it. We all know you can have too much noise at any point in time. You know you can have too much movement, and there can be negative consequences to that. You can't overdose on proprioception. It is a very organizing sensory system. So the way to give yourself more proprioception is through resistive types of movement. So it might be putting your hands on top of your head and pressing down so that you're getting that proprioceptive input all through your spine. It might be doing chair push-ups so that you're getting that input through your arms. Going and doing a wall push-up. If you can, do planks. But anything where you're giving your body that resistance is helpful in calming things down. Marcia, what are you laughing at?
Okay, so now I'm envisioning legions of misophones suddenly doing planks everywhere.
We're going to start a gym, actually. We're going to, the Misophonia.
I don't even think I
Association
could
gym.
do a plank. It's too hard. I don't think I have to just lie down.
Maybe try one. Okay. That was my attempt at humor, but yeah, Jillian, please.
I agree with everything Jenna just said.
Yeah, that was super cool.
I also think that a benefit of the physical motion and activity is that it burns up adrenaline, and especially if you do something vigorous, something that requires effort. I think there's a container. This is not literal, but it's a metaphor. There's a container this big, and every time you get charged up with some sound that triggers you, you get more and more adrenaline jolts going up and up and up, and you spill over eventually. If you can, on a regular basis, drain some of that adrenaline out, do some physically very active things of any sort, it will calm down your system because it brings down the level of adrenaline. And so that's a useful part of being physical. Another way to attack adrenaline, by the way, is Jenna was mentioning breathing. There's a particular style of breathing where you exhale more than you inhale. That helps bring that adrenaline down as well. It shifts from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. But yeah, anything physical, very helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting.
As far as fidgets, a lot of people need fidgets. People who have any number of things going on in their neurological system. Slime is a really good one for kids. They can make their own slime. There are dozens of recipes online, and you can make it sticky or you can make it more firm. So if it's the more firm kind, it's very satisfying to play with it and dig into it and have it in your hands and so forth. There are some brands that you can get that are it's called Uncle whoever it is. Again, I don't have it here, except my office that I don't go to anymore. Uncle somebody's slime. thinking putty, it's called. Yeah, but it's
Oh,
very,
sure, we can
Oh.
Google that. Yeah.
it's very stiff, but pliant.
Yeah.
You take it out of the container and you can just mess with it. It's very, very satisfying for a lot of people.
One other important point that I think is really critical, especially well, for parents, and I think about summertime in particular when they're scheduling a lot of things for their kids, is that anyone with misophonia, if they're able to go, and I'm going to use this as an example, if they're able to go to a family reunion, go to an event, chances are when they come home, they're going to need a day, 2 days, maybe even 3 days to recover. So be respectful of their need to recover. It's no different than if someone has COPD. You've got to give their body time to recover before they can move on, before they can engage again. So again, just continue to educate yourselves and be respectful of this.
Yeah, I hope that gets normalized. 'Cause I think you're absolutely right that that we just need some recovery time, and it would benefit everybody, honestly. Like a little bit of recovery time would benefit the entire family and surroundings.
Well, and it's okay to
yes.
do that. You should
Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
that. You deserve it. You totally deserve the right to go and say, I need an hour of downtime.
Jillian,
People
you said something.
feel
Oh, sorry.
guilty about that,
Yeah.
right? But you shouldn't feel
Yeah.
guilty.
Right. Jillian, yeah, I was going to go to the chats and just kind of, because we have about 15-20 minutes, so I wanted to leave some time at the end for folks, the panelists, to give kind of your closing remarks, but to kind of want to wrap up some of maybe the chat questions. Jillian, you were going to answer somebody. I wasn't sure who you were referring to.
Going to answer, who is that?
Stephen?
Okay, 3 to 5 strategies
Oh, yes.
or
Yeah, go.
exercises. So Marcia just named one, which is, give yourself some downtime. There's nothing wrong with leaving the room or whatever, as long as you do it in a way that's not hostile toward other people, and that's helpful. But a couple of things that I've mentioned are really useful. Inhale something. I teach it as inhale 5, exhale 7. It shifts the oxygen carbon dioxide ratio in the brain. It shifts the brain from the sympathetic, which is fight flight, to the parasympathetic, which is calm down. It works instantly, automatically, invisibly, because you just
inhale 5 seconds. That we mean inhale 5
or count to 5. Inhale to count to 5, or anything. It doesn't matter. Exhale more. I use 5 and 7. It doesn't matter. Just whatever it is. Exhale more than you inhale. If you practice that a lot of times during the day, connect it to something you already do many times during the day. You probably all pick up your phone many times during the day. So every time you pick up your phone, oh yeah, I'm going to take one of those breaths. It's just a way to remind yourself to do it, so that when you're actually getting upset or you're going into a difficult situation, you're more likely to remember to do it.
I set up a reminder on my phone, which I then get buzzed on my watch to like take a breath. So you don't need a special app. It's just comes built in.
I was going to say there are a lot of apps available. If you are someone that feels like you would be more likely to do the breathing if you had that support, there are a ton of them out there. So do some searching.
Another, like I've mentioned a couple of other things. List what you can or cannot do anything about, and then put your attention on the things you actually can. Another strategy that I have is talk to people about the CBT concept, cognitive behavioral therapy, that your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions are connected. If you change one, it causes the others to change. And since feelings pop up, you didn't intend to get angry, you didn't intend to be sad, you didn't, whatever the feeling is, it just pops up. To change that feeling, you can change one of the others, what you're doing or what you're thinking. And what you're thinking is a big one, because you're probably often thinking something very bad, negative, like either what is wrong with that blankety blank person? How many times do I have to tell them that they shouldn't be doing that? And you get all upset by the thing they're doing. Or maybe you get upset at yourself and you're thinking that. if you can change what you're telling yourself, it changes a whole lot of things. Oh, they did it on purpose. Well, maybe they did. But another possibility is they did not do it on purpose. They did it because they were just doing a normal human thing and that sound happened to come out. Did they do it on purpose just to get to you? Probably not, unless it's your little sister who wants more attention and you're getting all the attention, you know, whatever. But tell yourself a different story. That is a very useful strategy.
No, those are super helpful things to remember. Yeah, before we maybe I get Jenna's few kind of maybe final remarks. There was one question by Sherry Berry about, you had mentioned how miso could be a positive. I think you were talking about it in terms of kids, helping them kind of like think of miso in some way as a superpower. Is that what you're talking about? Because you know, a lot of us, we don't think of miso as being a positive thing, and she was
Right.
curious kind of what you were thinking about. I think it's a specific thing that you're probably referring to, right?
Right.
Maybe
So,
not.
yes. So there are people who have misophonia who have figured out places to put that are useful to them. For example, people with misophonia have a very, very high tendency to be perfectionists. They want to do everything primo. They've got a very high bar for themselves and they expect other people to reach that bar too. But in any case, they push themselves a lot. What kind of occupation would perfectionism be useful for? Because you have that trait, all right? It would be the two places where it's absolutely essential, according to me and according to the language: rocket science and brain surgery. Okay, those are the
And an
two.
air traffic controller.
Oh, air traffic, there's a good one.
Yeah.
Another one. That's a place where perfection really matters. It's a matter of life and death. Other places, it's not so important. But if you're good at math, for instance, you will probably be a good coder because you can see and attend to all the little details, or you'll be a good accountant because you'll notice when something is wrong out of one little digit or something. Your natural born wired ability to see things, that patterns, and to see things that don't fit in that pattern that's very useful for a lot of occupations. Your ability to empathize with other people because you've got issues, and it makes you more empathetic. I mean, your family probably doesn't think you're empathetic because you're yelling at them, but you're actually probably a very empathetic.
Or glaring at them. And not, yeah.
Glaring, yeah, that does a lot of good, glaring at them.
Or growling.
Yeah, the death glare. But anyway, if you can use that ability you have to be compassionate, because you probably don't tell everybody in your family everything that bothers you, it'd be overwhelming. You're trying to protect them. You try to protect your parents all the time. You don't tell them stuff, you know, whatever. If you can use that compassion that you actually have, sensitivity toward other people, where can you apply that? There are lots and lots of occupations. You could be a good actor. You could be a good screenwriter. You could be a good, maybe, counselor of some sort, because you have a sensitivity to other people and to their troubles. It can be very useful.
Yep. No, good points. I was just responding to somebody who was, and I'm going to definitely keep time for the final remarks at the end. I was just responding to somebody who was asking about, you know, how many sounds. I personally heard everything from just one trigger to dozens. I don't know if I could put a strict number on it, but in most cases, they seem to, I think, as we've mentioned, multiply as we get older. But I don't want that to sound hopeless. We tend to also have more control over our environment as we get older. So there's a bit of a balance there. But to Human, I mean, I guess it could be 100, but I don't know if there's a hard number. And let's see, any other connection between miso and restless legs. I have restless legs. I don't know if there's a connection, but that's one data point. And maybe and I'll let you guys jump in. The mocking question. Teens mocking their go ahead, please.
So I have not heard from my clients complaining about restless leg, but separate from that, I know that I have read where magnesium deficiency is an issue in misophonia, and I've also know that it's an issue with restless leg. So maybe there is a connection,
We
but
just found the cure, magnesium. Everybody get off their. No,
just
yeah,
be
that's
careful
really
which
interesting.
type you use.
Yeah. For some reason, that sounds familiar, but yeah, I'm gonna have to Google that again. But
So
that's-
Adil, what
thanks for
did you
bringing that
say
up.
at the very end there? Now I was listening to
Oh, there was
I was nodding like, yes, yes, yes. What was that?
Stacy asked, can anyone speak to mocking when teens mock their
Yeah.
triggers, their parents? I mean,
The-
mocking happens all over the back and
Yeah.
forth, but that's
Some
yeah.
people with misophonia have a compulsion to echo the sound that they hear. And they've described it to me over these decades as just a uncontrollable sort of itching sensation that they can't relieve unless they actually make this. I think it's called echolalia or something like that. And, you know, once they make the sound, they feel better. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but if you can't explain it to your coworkers or your family and say, this is just something unusual about me. And, you know, if you walk on the floor with those flip-flops, I'm going to make the sound with my mouth and then I'll stop. I mean, it's kind of harmless, really, in a way. Maybe people could feel sort of comfortable that would be an okay thing to do in certain situations, because it's a real thing. It isn't made up, and it's very difficult to stop.
It's a real thing, and the research that Kumar's
wanted
group
to
came
mention
out
that.
with
Yeah.
more recently is about mirror neurons, and it's probably related to that. So if you mirror something somebody else is doing, there's a way that seems to activate a different channel in your brain. Calm yourself down.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that that was kind of the blockbuster research that came out last year was mirror neurons. They found that in people who have misophonia, if they were watching somebody who was making the sounds, like let's say chewing, the neurons in the neurons that were related to in the person with misophonia who was not making the movement, some neurons related to the jaw were going crazy, and it seemed like then when they start to mimic the sounds, obviously we feel like we're coming down, and the idea maybe is that we're the body is regaining some balance by making the motion of the very neurons that were going crazy. And so there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but that was kind of an interesting possible reasoning for that. So let's see. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to my comment about the magnesium. So I remember, I can picture the piece of paper that this connection with the magnesium came from, and I spoke incorrectly. It was related to sound sensitivity, hypersensitivities in general, possibly, what I would consider related to sensory processing disorder. It wasn't specific to misophonia. So sorry about that. I've had that piece of paper even longer than I knew about misophonia. So my bad.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Well, are we in maybe the final 10 minutes? Yeah, we're in the final 10 minutes. And I think we're supposed to end around 4:30. Amazing that we were talking yesterday about maybe because there were less people ending this early, but I knew that we would end up talking about a lot of interesting stuff. Do you maybe everyone want to kind of have kind of their final remarks about anything that they want to say that they haven't been able to say? Maybe let's start with Marcia, and then we'll
Start
we'll
with
kind
me,
of
and then I might go.
Then we'll cut her off.
I wasn't really. Am I muted? Oh no,
No,
I wasn't really supposed to be here today, so I'm sorry if I felt like I was not quite prepared. I was just going to sit in and listen, and Cindy was going to pull it, but I guess that's weather. You know, what can you do
Yeah, I
about
hope she's
weather?
okay. Right. Yeah.
I'm sure she's probably putting plywood over her windows or something. You all have to move to Oregon. We don't have that kind of weather here. Anyway, I just want to remind everybody we have a convention coming up in October. It's an amazing convention. It's going to be our third online convention. we again are putting together the most fabulous panel of speakers. So please come to our online, remember it'll be recorded, you can watch it later, but do sign up and come to the annual convention. Eventually, we do hope to get those back in person, but we've had so much fun with people saying, I love this. I love not getting in a plane and going with all those people, so we'll probably have to continue having online and then in person. So do support the Misophonia Association. We crave your donations. We're a nonprofit. We just gave $2,500 to Chris Pearson for his ongoing research in the use of hypnotherapy and his, Jolene helped me, sequential repatterning, patterning, memory, something, consolidation. He has a name for his program. So we do pass along funds, and that was really a nice thing. And also we had a family give us about $1,500, and we purchased the nice Bose headsets and AirPods. And we found, I think it was like 15 young people who were economically oppressed, and we were able to hand them that box as a gift from this one family. Isn't that amazing? Different clinicians. So I want to focus on the positive work of our association, and please keep us in mind and visit the Facebook page. And also, please don't forget about our new Misophonia video plan, where you can join up for just $7 a month, and you can have access to all kinds of great stuff, and it really supports us. So I want to make sure we call out all these wonderful things, and thank you for listening today.
And just a note on that, thank you, Dr. Johnson. We're going to have the sign up for the conventions up soon. It's not on the website quite yet, but everyone will get an email when it's up. And then I will put a couple of links in the chat for people that are interested in the video program. And we actually have a one-on-one talk with one of our past presenters, Michael Menino, going tomorrow. So if you didn't get 2.5 hours worth of misophonia talking today, he's a neuroscientist. He's an amazing speaker. So I'll put some links in there as well. So I just wanted to chime in on the end of that one.
Yeah, of course. Jolene, final words from you.
Yeah. I don't talk about this aspect at the beginning of working with someone, but after we've been talking for a while, I've got some strategies going and so forth. We come around to the concept of what could go wrong in your world. I tell a story about a guy who came to my office, true story, in the 1980s, devastated because he'd just been diagnosed HIV positive, which at that time was like COVID being diagnosed before there was any treatment or anything.
Death sentence. Yeah.
It was a death sentence. He was scared to death. By the way, he didn't die, but that's another story. But he was scared to death. And it happened shortly after that. And he was saying, why me? Why is this happening to me? Why is God doing this to me? And I happened to hear a rabbi talking shortly after that. And I said to him afterward, Rabbi, people come to you for counseling, right? Yes. What do you say when they say, why me? Why is God doing this to me? And he said, without a moment's hesitation, why not you? Better, worse things have happened to better people than you or I. Okay. And then he went on from there. He said, what made you think you were going to get through this lifetime without having something to deal with? And then he said something which I thought was an interesting reference for a rabbi. We all have a cross to bear. Okay. And then he said, by the way, do you say, why me, when things are going well? So my parting thought is, it is not a disorder to be dismissed or to be downplayed or anything. I'm not implying that at all. And on the other hand, if you were going to trade with someone, with someone who has some horrible, awful thing, would you trade it with them? Probably not. You don't want to have, a brain tumor or something like that. So put it in
Remember the big picture. Yeah.
Yeah, put it in perspective. It's something you can develop the ability to manage your life around And in and of itself, misophonia is not going to kill you. It's going to inconvenience you, make you very uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult in a lot of different ways, but it is not a life-threatening disorder. It's one that is just vexing. But you can manage it. You can learn to manage it. That's my parting comment.
Very good. Yeah, Jenna, do you want to?
Well, I feel like I've kind of thrown some bullet points out there. I guess the one thing I would again encourage people to do is look at the videos. I don't get paid by Misophonia Association. This is me telling you it's a wealth of information. The sequential repatterning therapy is showing a lot of promise. I'm surprised Marcia didn't give you statistics, or at least I didn't hear it, about the success using the noise generating devices. Very successful. Tom Dozier's work, he has some good success with that. I think that there's a lot of benefit to the neurofeedback, which I didn't even get into today, but you can, and then the safe and sound protocol, I think, are really strong tools that I think are going to have a lot of promise in this area. So, and I'd be more than glad to have conversations with people. I do it all the time. I feel like it's part of my passion to help people find the services that they need in their area.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for everyone. Thanks panelists, especially for coming out. Maybe if you want to just drop, we're going to send this chat to as many people as possible. If you want to drop a link in the chat now, and that'll definitely get to people. Yeah, thanks for coming in. Thanks, listeners, for all your amazing questions. You can listen to the Misophonia. You can listen to my sleep-inducing voice every week on the Misophonia podcast. There's a whole new season of episodes coming up. Some therapists, some interesting stories, like the woman who chewed up her leather upholstery on her car in the 70s. So yeah, just a lot of things you can relate to, and sometimes that's all you need to kind of get through the day or the week. And thanks. Yeah, thanks again,
Thank
Nate.
you, Adil, for your time. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Misophonia Association is coming out with a 2023 Misophonia Association calendar.
Oh.
We have 12 submissions from artists who have misophonia. Polly Burns has been spending all year on this. It's not really necessarily a fundraiser because it's very expensive, but you can send an extra donation. And we want to make sure that as many people, can get that calendar and hang it on their wall. And there's a little something positive about it.
That
Do
reminds
you
me.
have all the art you need?
Yeah, right now we have enough art, but we're always looking for 2024 now.
Okay.
That answers the question somebody else just posted. I wanted to just one little tagline here. Jenna said she's not being paid by the Misophonia Association. I just have to tell you, nobody is being paid by the Misophonia Association. We are all volunteers. We have a part-time office manager, God bless her, Polly, who is paid, not like gigantic amount of money to manage all the things that go on in the office, but the rest of us are all volunteers.
Yep. And I just want to say, we mentioned a lot of engineers are misophones, but a lot of artists are misophones. So if you happen to be listening and you want to drop a link to your whatever Etsy or website, drop it in the chat and we'll definitely check it out. I know on the podcast, I like to promote as much art and also just businesses of misophones as I can. So now is your time to get your plug in before we say good evening or afternoon. And Marcia is going to do a dance and then maybe some planks after. All right, Nate, what should we do here? Should we
I don't even know what that is.
do
Anyway.
you have some ending music or
Yeah, I can sing if you want.
I'll
No,
have my
I
dog.
I guess I opened it up, so I'll close it off. But I wanted to again thank everybody for joining us. Keep current with what's going on in the Misophonia Association by going onto the website. And thank you so much. I mean, it was wonderful, and anybody that is doing anything with misophonia should link somebody to Adil's podcast, because I know that you know, as we continue to grow as a community and grow as an association, we're going to just find out more and more really amazing information and that we can use as people with misophonia. So thank you very much. I'm
Thanks for having me.
going to go ahead and I'm gonna,
Great job, Adil. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. You guys made it easy. This was fun.
We'll see
gonna
you
go-
soon. See you soon at the convention.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
going to
Can't
go ahead
wait
and
for it
stop
to
the
be in person.
recording now.
Okay, cool.